I can cook that. I've always wanted to know what a gooseberry pie tastes like. Now, if only I had a forest full of critters to help me bake it. We'll start by making a homemade pie crust. Combine flour with salt and sugar. Now the trick to a buttery crust is getting the butter mixed into the flour before adding any liquids. We also want to make sure that all of our ingredients are cold. I popped my butter into the freezer for about an hour prior to getting started. That made it super easy to grate the frozen butter against the cheese grater to get butter shavings. You can also use a pastry cutter and cut the butter into the dry ingredients, but I found that the cheese grater is the best time saver. I sort of did a hybrid of both of these methods and used the pastry cutter to mix the butter into the flour mixture until the mixture was crumbly. Next, we'll add in some white vinegar, which will help make the crust extra flaky. Finally, we can start slowly adding in ice water. The water needs to be cold to prevent the butter from melting when we start working the dough with our hands. While we mix up our crust, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to tell YouTube you want to keep your feed fed with more delicious content from the Starving Chef. As we work the dry flour crumbles into a dough, add a tiny bit more of the ice water until a sticky dough forms. Continue to gently work the mixture into a smooth and slightly elastic dough. After the dough has come together, we'll want to cut it into two pieces that will go on to be the base crust and the top of the pie. Let these dough balls chill wrapped in plastic for at least 30 minutes. Now, onto the filling. Gooseberries are naturally found in Europe and Asia, meaning if you live in the United States and you bought Cape gooseberries, which are these bright orange berries that are also known as golden berries, or ground cherries, which look like Cape golden berries but taste more like a sour tomato than a cherry. Neither of these supposed gooseberries are the correct gooseberry that we want. Instead, I resorted to buying canned gooseberries online, which are in fact the gooseberry we've been looking for. These gooseberries are canned in a light syrup, so in order to preserve the flavor of the gooseberry as much as possible, I drained all but a few tablespoons of the syrup from each can. We'll start making the filling by melting some butter, then add the drained gooseberries to the pot. The gooseberries will pop and break down easily, so be sure to stir gently to preserve as many gooseberries as possible. Next, we can add in some chopped apple that definitely wasn't poisoned by the evil queen disguised as an old woman, some salt, and a drizzle of honey. Because gooseberries tend to be pretty tart on their own, the honey will help bring out the natural sweetness, while the apples will add some texture to the pie as the gooseberries break down. The sourness of the gooseberries will further be mellowed out with a boatload of sugar and a splash of elderflower cordial. Bring the mixture to a rolling simmer before adding in a starch like tapioca, and some additional flavor comes from freshly grated nutmeg. Bring the filling back to a boil and let the liquids cook down to about half of their volume. Then we'll remove from the heat and let the filling cool completely. As the filling cools, we can roll out the pie crusts. I rolled mine to be about 2 to 3 inches wider than the pie pan I was going to be baking in. The pie crust will shrink as it gets trimmed and even more when it's baked, so be sure to account for that shrinkage if you make this pie for yourself. We also don't want to press the pie all the way down into the pan, but rather let it fall naturally into the pan, and we'll only use our fingers to gently help it along. Once the first crust is in, we'll roll out the top crust the same way and drape it on the rolling pin until we're ready to assemble the pie. We'll fill the pie crust with the gooseberry filling and make sure it's in an even layer before draping the top crust over the entire pie. Then we'll trim the pie crust so that both crusts are flush with each other and the pie pan. Somehow my crust was not nearly as satisfying to cut as Snow White made it look. We'll want to reserve some of the crust for the lettering on top. Brush the crust with an egg wash and use it to glue the top and bottom together before brushing the entire thing with the egg wash. I then use my thumbs to pinch together the crust seams all the way around the edges, and then I use the tiny fork to crimp the edges to look like little bird feetsies. Finally, we'll use some of the reserved pie crust to write out Grumpy on top of the pie in cursive. I'm not sure how those birds did it so nicely, but this is about as good as my lettering is gonna get. We'll give the entire pie one last brushing of egg wash and add a few vents to the top of the crust to release any steam buildup. Then bake the pie for about 30 to 40 minutes or until golden brown. Snow White was one of the very first movies I remember watching as a kid, and this pie especially was something that I wanted to try. But nothing ever came close to the buttery crust and sweet and tangy filling that can be found in this version of Grumpy's pie. To me, gooseberries taste a bit like a sour fig that's been balanced out with the sweetness of apple. It's a bit of a messy pie, but I'm sure Grumpy would have loved it all the same. What fictional feast should I make next? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this recipe, don't forget to flip that sub button and ring the dinner bell so you can be notified of my latest recipes and foodie adventures that I post every week. Do you ever get hungry? You can find this recipe and many more with ingredient amounts and step-by-step instructions over on thestarvingchefblog.com. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next episode.